And sometimes like a recording doesn't live up to your experience, but the recording was just astonishing. I mean, it was incredibly powerful. Well, for me, I've done many things. I actually got an undergraduate degree in English. I went and got a graduate degree in painting, but halfway through that degree, I jumped ship and decided to pursue sound. And part of it was my experience as a listener. I always listened to experimental music, and I think that really sort of trained my ears. I also like making noise. And so I'm not a musician. And so that idea of, I think, thinking of sound and the textural properties of sound was really appealing to me. And that I turned that way and never went back. For me, I think I do a lot of different kinds of work. Some of it is sculptural and some of it is purely sort of recorded sound. And it was really thinking about recorded sound for this project. And one of the things I did before I even got here was a lot of research. I tend not to enter into something like this knowing that I'm going to be here for a month without really covering my bases and trying to understand a little bit. So one of the things I wanted to make sure to do was think about Zion in relation to the people. What are other people's experiences? I'm an interloper here, and so there's so many people who have deep experience, and I really wanted to capture some of that. So part of it was really thinking about that, and then the other part was knowing that there were sites of acoustic significance, things that in a canyon that are just bound to sound amazing. I think most of the time we wouldn't know that they sound amazing because we're just looking at these photographs of them. So, but you look at a giant arch, you look at some of these alcoves and caves and steep canyon walls, and you've got to wonder, what does that place sound like? So I think all of the research that I had done, it paid off, but then a certain amount of it just flew out the window, because as soon as you get to this place, it's like, it just knocks your socks off. And I just had to experience it. So it was really going with my equipment, all of my crazy recorders and everything, and just going from place to place to place and just trying to wrap my head around it, and that took a while. So the equipment that I brought with me on this trip, it always sort of changes a little bit from location to location or what I hope to do. And because I wasn't totally sure what I was going to be recording here, I brought a lot of stuff. So, but I think the star of the show for me in this particular experience has been what's called an ambisonic microphone. And an ambisonic microphone essentially has like 4 little microphone capsules. And what it allows you to do is capture sound pretty much in a sphere. So like virtual reality, 360-degree spherical sound. And that I really wanted to think about that in relation to the canyons, and thinking about, well, what sound is coming from above us? What sound is, surrounding us in all these different locations? One of the reasons that was kind of a critical tool for me here is that I also, as you'll see around in this, this studio, I've made 8 speakers in a subwoofer. I brought the sort of driver, which are the kind of guts of the speaker, but I couldn't carry, all of these speakers with me on the airplane, so I brought just the little components, and I got moving boxes, and I built my own speakers. So this studio is a spatialized sound environment. So at the same time that I'm recording, thinking about space, I'm coming back here and going through those recordings and finding ways to sort of shape it with the space of this room. So how long does it take for me to go from start to finish with a project? That is a great question, because it just completely varies from project to project. Sometimes you just capture an amazing thing and you don't need to do anything to it. It's just like, this is just magic as is. And then sometimes it just takes more crafting. The work that I've been doing here, I honestly thought that I would have. I've got a lot of irons in the fire in my computer right now and a lot of projects that I'm working on, but I've really been focusing on this one that deals a lot with wind and water, and I keep coming back to it and keep working on it. So that one I feel like I'm getting close to done, but you know, that's been almost a month working on that. But at the same time, I've got all these other little things that I'm working on too. I tend to be that person who can't read one book at once. I always have like 5 different things, and sometimes I finish them, and sometimes I half finish them, and it's sort of the connection between all those ideas that is really interesting to me. So one thing I think, sometimes I'll really focus on one piece, but more often than not, I'm thinking across them. And I think for this project, it's really important that I'm working on multiple things at once, because there's a lot of kind of cross talk between these pieces. And I've interviewed so far, I think 6 people, and I'm hoping to get a bunch more in while I'm here. But those interviews are also, these people are not in the same room talking, and yet there's these amazing themes that keep cropping up from person to person. And I think that's going to need to be teased out over time in multiple pieces. So in terms of what I'm looking for when I'm recording, it changes from day to day. Sometimes I'll be told by someone who lives here, like, well, you really haven't experienced the sound at Zion unless you've heard a canyon wren. So then I'm on the hunt for a canyon wren in February, which I've actually found one, which was shocking. So sometimes it's really specific that I'm looking for something. But sometimes it's really just, for me, it was a lot of discovery. I had no idea what I was going to experience. I mean, you have assumptions, but sometimes it was simply like I knew I wanted to capture sounds of water. That was an important part of the Zion story, and it's something that I needed to capture. So the Virgin River is right here. That's an easy one. But there's also lots of seeps and snow melt and little dribbly, water coming out of stones. And I would usually not be looking for them and find them and be like, oh, I've got to get that. I think another thing that's really important and something I wanted to mention is the fact that Zion is also about people. Zion is currently about 5 million people a year, and so the noises we make as humans are part of that story too. So I don't want to be that person who shuts out and doesn't recognize the fact that this is not the same place it was 1,000 years ago. It's changed, clearly. And so collecting some of the just evidence of us as humans, snow plows since we had this snowfall, the sound of the shuttle, the sound of the cars moving in and out, people's voices, helicopters, airplanes, all of these things are things that shape our experience. And also importantly, like, we're not the only well, we are the only people here, I guess. We're not the only organisms here. And the fact that all of these sounds, how are they shaping the ability to communicate of other organisms here? The birds that stop singing whenever the plane goes over. Like, this is our impact on this acoustic environment. I think listening here has reminded me that it takes time. And one of the things I think was just, I would go up to some of these places and just, I always would bring my equipment because you just never know, what you're gonna get. And oftentimes you'll hit record and then you'll stop recording and the most amazing thing happens as soon as you turn your recorder off. And you know what, I think that's okay. One of the things I really recognize here too is that what I'm hearing is not the same as what's being recorded. And I think what you see through the lens of a camera and what you paint is not the same as being here. And they have different meanings. I think a painting or a sound work or a photograph distills something about the sensibility of the person who shared that. But one thing I noticed, I became super interested here in echoes, because it's a canyon and the echoes are so different from place to place, and how I could only capture so much of that on a recorder. And there were things that I found magical and amazing bouncing back at me from the canyon, and then I would go back to the recordings and it was like it's there, but it's like not there. So it's amazing, you know. And the things that the thing that's amazing about listening is that we as humans are constantly amplifying, just through our circuitry, amplifying what is around us. Even though the volume may not be so high, we're making it higher with our attention. And it's that attention, I think, that's like what's happened to me here is the time to just be here, and the time to just be in one place, and the time to experience one place over and over. Like, it wasn't just a weekend. I'm here for the month, and I could really, really dig into a particular location and realize how it's changed over time. So one of the things that I did while I was at Zion was I would become a bit obsessed with certain locations. And one of those was Upper Emerald Pool. And that was someplace I just needed to experience in different conditions and to understand how it changes. Another was up on the East Rim, which some of my favorite places were the hikes that I took there. So there was a particular hike up Pine Creek that I just kept doing over and over again, because the first time it's super fresh and you're just taking it in and you're kind of grappling with the wonder of this amazing place. The second time you have a little bit more familiarity and you're able to look for specific things and recognize the things that you didn't hear. And so sometimes I'm hearing new things because there are new things there. For example, perhaps a canyon wren. But other times I just wasn't tuned to pay attention to them. And so that idea of really paying attention and being attentive and being able to like let the place come alive around you, part of that is repeated experience, and part of that is just spending the time in a particular place. So, do I remember the soundscapes of places more than visual? In some ways, no. I don't. Sound is a difficult and elusive sense. It's not something I think it has a different connection to our memory than our other senses. For example, I think we all have had that experience of smelling something that just zips us right back to childhood. And that's like, I think, a super powerful sense for memory. And I think there's something about sound in its fleetingness and the way that it is, the way that we're constantly kind of tuning in and out of sound, that I think makes it different the way that it plays in our memory. So in some ways, I, like most people, forget the way places sound. And I think that's one of the reasons I love working with sound, is that it's, in some ways, you know, you can never really fix sound in the world because it's always different, it's always changing. But I think part of this recording and stuff is like sort of re-understanding what some of those things are. It's almost like this external memory of these places. And I think Zion deserves to have some of that communicated and some of that story told and shared. My favorite part of being at Zion, there are two things. One of them is super specific and one of them is more general. The super specific is like the second or third day I was here, I took a hike up to Emerald Pools, and it was early in February, and so, you know, it was still pretty cold. I mean, it's snowing out now, it's cold now too, but it was really cold then, and the icicles were really forming up at Emerald Pool. And what happened up in that incredible place was that the sun at 9 would finally kind of break over the peaks, and it would sweep its way across that sandstone face, and it would heat it up, and all of those icicles just start plummeting. And some of them are hitting the rocks below, some of them are hitting other ice, some of them are skittering down onto the frozen pond. And it was amazing while I was there. And sometimes like a recording doesn't live up to your experience, but the recording was just astonishing. I mean, it was incredibly powerful. And I think that power kind of set me up for the rest of my trip. And it was no surprise that the first thing I started editing was kind of about intensity. And because I think that this is an intense place, and it's, a challenging place, and it can be a dangerous place. And I think it's important to convey that. And how do you convey that with sound? And so that was kind of emblematic to me of some of that power of this place. One of the things that I really loved about being here is just the unpredictability of the sound and really not knowing. And I think, obviously if I lived here for 20 years, it would be perhaps a little bit more predictable. Or if I studied geology or if I studied climate and weather, I would understand some of these things. But as an artist coming in, part of the thing I think that was sort of magical is not knowing what was going to happen around every corner. And I think we know that with our eyes too, but listening, it was always incredible. Like you would hear the rush of this river, and as soon as you go through a bend in the canyon, or as soon as you dip into a slot canyon, it just disappears. And so there's a kind of natural acoustics of this place, but then also, February is an interesting time because Zion starts waking up a bit. I started hearing a lot more birds over the course of this and experiencing those things. And also just sort of seeing that there were these pockets of activity, and I never knew what was going to be, around the next corner.